stuff. I preach as easily. How do you pray? I don't need you to actually answer me, but just think about this for a second. How do you go about prayer? Who taught you how to pray or what prayer looks like? What kind of things do you find yourself praying for? And maybe most importantly for this story, how persistent are you in those prayers? The New and Old Testament readings for today both are about prayer and give us examples of biblical prayer. In the Old Testament, you encounter Hannah. She's a woman who's bereft because she's apparently unable to conceive. Her story, though, a woman that is desperate to have a child and pleading with God to have one, happens at least 7 times in the Bible that God then answers the prayer. Then, as now, many would-be parents pray similar prayers to be blessed with children, and the repeated prayer is worth our time. Back then, the culture was a bit different than ours. We think childbearing is very important, and families that can't have children, it's a huge deal. We know that. But even with that, it's hard to get how big a deal it was back then. In these days, the necessity for a woman to have a child was almost total. Their status as a wife, often as a woman of any value at all in society, were entirely tied to birthing. You know this. Think of stories in the Old Testament where women are having trouble getting pregnant, and so they bring their servants to their husbands to try to have a surrogate baby through a servant, or they let their husband have another wife or 2 or 3, and then there's a battle between the women about who can have the most babies. Like, having babies in this era is a major, major deal. And so you can understand Hannah's plight here of not being able to have a baby. She's going to be looked down on as cursed, shunned by God, and then shunned by the community if this keeps up. Her husband would be in the right to basically just ignore her forever, and that's really not a great life for a woman. So in her desperation, she's willing to give up her own dignity, makes a fool of herself in a public space, praying for God's intervention. She's outside the tabernacle. This is a holy, sacred place. You show up there humbly. You show up there dressed really well. You show up there with sacrifices and offerings. You don't show up drunk. But her frustrations and her worries have reached a level where pleading like a drunken woman early in the morning is what she's resorting to. Right? When they look at her, it looks like she's ranting and she's raving. She's hardly making sense. Her prayer has become so raw and guttural that the people around her can't even recognize it as prayer anymore. Sometimes when something goes really bad in our lives, we wind up out of our own control. And if we're lucky, we turn to God in those moments. I don't know where or when you learn to pray. For me, the biggest time I learned to pray was quite a while ago now. As a kid, I went to church and I was taught, we did the Sunday school thing, and I knew that. But at one point, Mary got pregnant. It was our first pregnancy, and within about 9 or 10 weeks, the baby miscarried, and we were like devastated, right? This is really tough. We're the epitome of white middle-class kids living in Ontario, so like stuff always goes right for us, right? Like encountering something that we actually couldn't do anything about was an entirely new experience for us. And so when she got pregnant again, I think that's when I learned how to pray properly, because I was praying for a fetus I had zero control over, right? It was the first thing where I thought I literally can do nothing. We could avoid, Mary could avoid drinking caffeine and like smoking and whatever. But really, this as a parent, or this in pregnancy, it really feels like this is beyond your control. So for some of us, when things are beyond our control, when things are tough, when you're in Hannah's position, you start learning how to pray. For some people, I know the argument is the question is, why do bad things happen to good people? That comes up a lot. One of the answers, not the only answer, but one of them is that you learn to pray when bad things happen to you. A lot of people learn a costly, tough lesson through difficult moments in life. It's in the belly of a whale that Jonah cries out to the God who saves him. It's when his young son life hangs in the balance that David starts writing prayers of confession in the Psalms. When King Manasseh is bound in chains and bronze, he humbles himself for God. In the Psalms, we're told God himself commands us, in the days of trouble, he will be honored. There's this sense bad stuff happens and he can be honored through our prayerful response to the bad stuff. There's a guy named T.D. Talmage. He said, if your path has been smooth, you would have depended on your own sure-footedness. But God roughened the path, so you have to take hold of his hand. That's what Hannah's up to. She's like a drowning person yelling for help, an addict looking for support. The time in her life has come when what she needs is beyond her control or capacity, and so she calls out for help. If you've been in that kind of scenario, try to remember it. And you can use it to encourage other people when they go through their own stories. If you're old enough, you know the only guarantee here is that we're going to go through these stories. If you're there now, reach out to somebody. You can reach out to somebody you trust, and you can also just reach out generally. It is amazing the people that come out of the woodwork that you would not expect to be that helpful, who suddenly are super helpful out of nowhere. You can pray for change. You can pray to know who to talk to, who to ask for help. Prayer for self-control. How will you respond to the challenge that's right in front of you? Jesus likes to hear you do this. He likes to hear us cry out to him for help and to one another in help. I think that's part of the story he gives us. He loves to see people helping each other. And when he's asked to teach the disciples how to pray, the Lord's Prayer kind of highlights this. See, it opens the scene, right? Jesus is praying by himself. He spends time with his Father. Something about the way he does it, or maybe the way his face shines when he comes back, I don't know, makes people ask, like, how do you pray like that? And of course, these men all know how to pray, right? Be realistic. They're all from a serious religious culture. They've all gone to Sunday school, so to speak. They know the Shema. They know the regular prayers. They've done all of the things Jewish people do. And yet something about the way Jesus appears in his prayer life screams to their souls, I want that too. And so he teaches them the Lord's Prayer, and then he tells them how they're supposed to pray it. The story he uses is really weird, I think. He tells the story of a guy who's in bed and somebody's knocking on the door late at night. The guy at the door knows that what he's doing is super annoying and inconsiderate, but he's weighed the factors and decided it doesn't matter. I'm going to knock on the door anyway, and I assume my friend will give me the benefit of the doubt here, will open the door and will help me out, because I wouldn't be knocking in the middle of the night if it wasn't serious. Now, when I was a kid, we had a landline. We had one phone, right? And there were 6 of us in our house, and we all had girlfriends and whatever. And so my dad had a steadfast rule. It was so short. No calls between 6 and 7. It's as clear as could possibly be. And if you called my house between 6 and 7 when I was a teenager, he would literally answer the phone gruffly, say no calls between 6 and 7, and hang back up. He didn't care who you were or what, like, absolutely, I'm not doing this. So our phone practically never rang between 6 and 7 until caller ID showed up, right? And then my dad could see who was on the phone. Now, still almost all the time, it was no calls between 6 and 7 and hang up. But he had ailing parents. My mother had ailing parents. And so there were people that between 6 and 7 could get a hold of my dad. Not very many, but some. And that's a little bit what the story here is, that there are people for whom you can get a hold of God no matter what the time is. But that's why I find this so weird, because the picture here is God is in bed asleep with his kids. Like back then, the house was such that you were like in the same room with the kids. And so it's kind of asking you to picture God as asleep with a bunch of kids. And when I picture God and I'm praying, like that's not what I think of. I would be really reluctant, I think, to pray if that was my regular image of God. Some of you know this, when you have little kids and they finally go to sleep, your house is like a tomb, right? I had a friend named Eric. He lived in Montreal when we were there, and he lived in a really old apartment building. And it was creaky, right? Like one of these old houses with like 18 apartments in a weird house. And he said one day he realized he could, at 2 o'clock in the morning, get from his room across the upper floor of his house, down the stairs to the kitchen, make a like warm up a bottle, get all the way back, and not make a single sound. And his claim was, if there was an Olympics for sneaking around your own house, I'd win. So getting up in the middle of the night, pretty serious if you're a parent. Your friend better have a real problem, right? The laws of hospitality back then required that you would open your door. It was really strict. You had to open the door for your friends. It wasn't a joke. The street can be dangerous. You never know what's going to happen. There's no restaurants. There's no hotels. Like you had to open the door if somebody was knocking, and you would want them to do it for you. I don't think the story is about God being asleep. I think it's about the persistence and the willingness to call to prayer, even in difficult times and moments that don't seem fortuitous. Persistence is important. Asking and refusing to give up. John Pilch says the better translation for persistence here would actually be shamelessness. To, without shame, call upon God over and over again. And I think that's what Hannah's up to, right? She's looking like a drunk woman early in the morning. She's willing to go to God shamelessly, with whole abandonment. I don't know how often any of us have done that. When you pray, you're praying to one you don't have to have shame in front of, though, right? Jesus is naked, hanging on a cross, dying, and he prays in that moment, right? He's praying in the most shameful moment of his existence. He's between the con men, right? And he's willing to pray. So when it comes to praying to him, you can always do it. That being said, if you leave it to a whim, you're not going to get it done. That I know. How many of you, maybe, let's see, you'll probably all admit this, hopefully. If you don't save money, if you say, I will save money at the end of the month, how much money is there left at the end of the month to save? Right. But if you put money aside at the start of the month, miraculously, it turns out there was money to save in the month, right? The idea is you need to have a time set for prayer. You need to prioritize it. You can't just say, I'll do it whenever, or, I'll get around to it, or I'll do it when I drive to work. Although if you pray for the guy that cut you off, that's bonus points. You have to have a plan. And if you have the plan, I think what happens is you then start praying at other times. At least that's what happens to me. Like you have a morning prayer and evening prayer. And then during the day, it seems more reasonable or logical or likely that I will pray in the middle of the day if I've prayed to start my day. But if I miss my morning prayer, the odds of me having a prayer between that and bedtime are pretty slim. And I think there's something to that dailiness that Jesus talks about in prayer, and the coming over and over and over again to pray. N.T. Wright says formal prayers like liturgies and church services are vital for most people's spiritual health, but they're like the metal shell of a car. To be effective, your Sunday worship needs the fuel for its engines, and that's effective prayers in the week. dogged, even funny determination where you would go to your sleepy friend to help you out of a tight spot, doing it between the Sundays so that the prayers we do together are not your only prayers. I think that's helpful. God wants to hear your prayers. They want to answer your prayers. Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, they love us enough that they will do far more than get up out of their bed when they're sleeping to take care of you. Jesus will give up his whole life painfully, disgracefully, so that your prayers could be answered and so that he could pray for you eternally. We can trust him more than any traveler can trust in hospitality laws in the days we're looking at. We can trust him more than you can trust a family member to open up the door in the middle of the night, or that you could plan for my dad to answer your phone call between 6 and 7, because if you're honest, most of us wouldn't do it. I mean, if you're honest, you won't even answer an email, right? You'll pretend you never saw the text because it's disturbing to get a text message. But Jesus doesn't pretend to miss the message, right? He gets up and he acts. He taught us to pray. He taught us that he offers grace and forgiveness. He taught us it's okay to look as foolish as Hannah did that morning when she's praying outside the tabernacle. He says he prays for us constantly, and sometimes he's praying that we would be a praying people, that we would abandon whatever it is that holds us back from prayer so that we could call out and reach to him. And so we'll do our regular prayers of thanks and intercession. There's going to be a sung response this time, so I'll try to move over so you can see it. But I invite you, when you pray together like this, to really remember that there's this kind of corporate responsibility to pray at other times. There's this terrifying, to me, study of ministers in North America where they found that over 90% of us spend less than 2 minutes in prayer per week outside of worship. Like, other than when we're paid to pray, the average minister is really just not praying. It's no surprise then their congregations aren't praying, right? But if you think prayer matters, and if you think Hannah was onto something, if you think Jesus is onto something, if you think Christianity is onto something, then we are really called to pray between the prayers we do here together. That being said, let's pray. Lord, listen to people pray. Lord, send your spirit in this way. Lord, listen to your children pray. Send us love, send us power, send us grace. Loving and holy God, we come before you in prayer, trusting that your power works in the world in ways we cannot imagine. We thank you for calling goodness forward, for supporting love, for creating justice, even in situations that seem hopeless. Draw on our prayers this day as a sign of your Spirit at work in our lives. Listen to your children pray. Lord, send your spirit in this way. Lord, listen to your children pray. Send us love, send us power, send us grace. God of the world and all its peoples, we pray today for those who lift up their voices in troubled nations. We think particularly of Ukraine, Palestine, and Yemen. Call the powerful